Hi, Bob. Great to have you on our program. Can I begin by asking you what is the new job description for a diplomat post-pandemic, other than doing the regular cocktail circuits and after-dinner speeches?
Well, Dinesh, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to participate in today's webinar. And I want to send my very warm greetings to the many Sri Lankan friends who are also going to be speaking on this. To answer your question, I think the pandemic has had really a lot of positive impacts on diplomacy. And the first is on digital diplomacy, as we're talking today. Zoom and other conferencing tools have really become accepted forms of diplomatic communication. So diplomats and business people no longer have to travel thousands of miles for meetings that can be done over Zoom in 30 to 60 minutes. And of course, if those meetings turn out to be productive, then you can make the trip. But I think we save a lot of time. Second, Zoom and Teams have become wonderful tools for public diplomacy for embassies around the world. So whereas if an embassy wanted to organize a speech for an ambassador to explain business opportunities in their country, you might be lucky to get 200 people. But with Zoom, you can get listeners from not only all over the country, but all over the world. And so it's a terrific tool, I think, for commercial diplomacy. Now, of course, I think the sensitive negotiations are still going to have to be done in person. And we all know that a lot of the greatest breakthroughs in diplomatic history have always been not across the table, but in the informal chats that take place at the bar or for a little quiet walk in the park. So, in those cases, digital diplomacy is really not going to be that useful. But overall, I think it's had a positive impact.
Thank you. How do you describe the impact of economic diplomacy on investment and exports? And do you think that government should set KPIs for ambassadors?
Yeah, as somebody who worked in the American Foreign Service for 31 years, I think that the diplomatic presence is going to remain super important for every country as they want to promote their products and promote more investment into their countries, because it's only through that on the ground staff that a country can develop a list of the companies that might be interested in opportunities in your country. And you need your economic officers to be proactive and not just sit in their offices and wait for people to call. If there's one thing that I sometimes notice about foreign embassies here in Washington, is that they're not proactive enough. They need to get out there and meet people and talk to people and figure out what sectors offer the best opportunities, and then actively reach out to those companies that are involved in those sectors to explain what the opportunities are in those sectors. And they also need to introduce themselves to the chambers of commerce, to the think tanks, and to all the other platforms where their ambassador or their commercial officer could potentially be invited to speak. And of course, they've got to cultivate good relations with the government, and in our case, with the US Congress, because they have an important say over things like GSP and that kind of thing. So you really do need active commercial diplomats, and of course the ambassador is very, very important. But just the ambassador, he or she has got to have a really solid team of experts behind him or her.
Given the importance of the developed countries, how should governments set about addressing those missions and those countries?
Well, again, I think you're gonna have to just get people to get, first of all, make sure you have a good experienced staff, but then make sure that your people are spending most of their time outside of their offices. Again, actively promoting business opportunities, developing ideas for potential business partners, for example. A lot of American companies aren't that experienced with working overseas, and so they, you tell them about Sri Lanka, or you tell them about India or Indonesia, it's a kind of scary thing for them to think about. So if if you can explain not only what the opportunities are, but who are some of the potentially good business partners in those countries who can help them navigate and take advantage of those opportunities, that's going to make an enormous difference. And of course, you need to have people who are knowledgeable about financing. And of course, you need to have people who are good at cultivating relations with the government decision makers and regulators. And all of those things will be important to help your companies to succeed in these challenging markets, because everybody's upping their game now, because everybody wants to create jobs through exports. So I think governments around the world are very wise to put a real premium on this and make this one of the central parts of not only the ambassador's job, but really most of the people in the embassy need to be thinking about this.
You talked about chambers of commerce. How should diplomats work with these chambers?
Yeah, chambers of commerce like the AmCham in Sri Lanka play a really vital role that is often not really very well understood. For one thing, they advocate on behalf of American companies for measures to improve the ease of doing business, to help reduce taxes, to clarify regulatory uncertainties of one sort or another. They also play a very, very important role for small and medium-sized enterprises who usually don't have the resources to hire someone on the ground in markets all over the world. So they really rely on these AmChams to help them out. And frankly, there are also times when individual companies don't want to raise difficult issues like, let's say, corruption, because they might fear retribution from the government. So in those kind of cases, it's actually very useful to have the AmCham raise those kinds of system-wide issues on their behalf and on behalf of other companies. So the chambers play an enormously important role, and it's important to work very closely with them.
Should ambassadors actually canvass on behalf of their companies in the host country?
They can. The only thing they need to be careful of, and we did this ourselves in America, is that you've got to be careful not to play favorites. So if, for example, there's a big contract in Sri Lanka to build a power plant or something like that, you might have several American companies that are interested, General Electric and others, and you can't play favorites. So what we do is we have a special advocacy center set up within the Department of Commerce, and companies apply to that advocacy center to be approved for advocacy by the ambassador. And then if there's only one company, then that's great, and you've gotten approval and you can go ahead and promote that company. But if there are more than one company, then you have to just promote America without, you have to be clear that there are several companies that are interested, and we want an American company to win, but it's up to the government to choose which one. So yes, you can promote companies, but do it in a way that you're not playing favorites.
How does good governance and all fit into all these fit into this equation?
Governance is actually just an essential part of doing business these days. American companies around the world are looking at doing business in places that are going to be easy to do business in. So that's why things like the World Bank Index of Ease of Doing Business is so important, because it creates competition and it creates a mechanism for companies and countries to measure how they're doing vis-a-vis other countries. And the smart countries of the world are climbing the ladder of the ease of doing business. But governance is not just about the ease of doing business. It's about things like corruption, reducing corruption, and also about rule of law. American companies, and really all companies, want to be sure that there's going to be a level playing field wherever they're operating. And they want to be sure that they're going to have access to things like independent arbitration if there's an investment dispute. So those are really important things for any country to develop and make sure that they can provide reassurances to investors on those scores.
Can you also share your experience working with multilateral agencies as an ambassador?
With what, sorry?
Multilateral agencies like the World Bank and the IMF.
Multilateral.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, multilateral agencies themselves sometimes have commercial opportunities for companies. So that's important for people to recognize. And oftentimes people don't pay sufficient attention to that. But also, as I said, the World Bank in particular plays an enormously important role working with governments to improve their ease of doing business. And so they have very, very detailed criteria that they've established. And the smartest companies and countries in the world work closely with the World Bank to try to improve their ranking on that index. And it pays dividends for them because they can attract more investment because people do pay attention to that.
What advice would you offer a young ambassador who's joining, a young diplomat who's joining the foreign service for the first time to become effective in his role?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I always tell young diplomats is that the two things that they're going to always have to be skillful at, and that they should begin to cultivate skills in. One is public diplomacy, because every single diplomat overseas is a public diplomacy officer and somebody who needs to communicate to a wide range of audiences about your country, and everybody should be a public diplomacy officer. So that's a skill to develop. And the other one is commercial diplomacy, because at the end of the day, embassies have to prove their worth to people back home. And one of the best ways and easiest ways to do that is to help promote your business and to provide exports that are going to create jobs back home, that are going to create economic opportunities for your people back home. And so commercial diplomacy is an absolutely essential part of every embassy around the world's role. And I think, again, I think many foreign embassies here in Washington don't do probably as much as they could and should. And so I'm really glad that you're organizing this seminar, because it's important to really reinforce that.
I have two final questions to wrap this session up.
Please.
How important are NGOs in this game?
Yeah, well, we've already talked a little bit about the AmCham, but there are other NGOs that work as well on things like corruption, that work on a whole variety of issues that affect the business climate. So again, I think governments, one of the sad trends now in the world is that many foreign governments are cracking down on NGOs and making it more difficult for them to operate in many of these countries. And I think that's a mistake, because again, the most successful countries in the world in terms of attracting business are the ones with the best governance. And particularly that's true for smaller countries that don't have huge markets. If you're a country like India that has a huge market, then maybe you can get away with having some small problems. But if the smaller the country you are, the more you have to be at the very top of your game and have the best possible governance, independent rule of law, and a very solid business climate that's going to be attractive. Because if you don't have that, people are just not going to have the patience to do business there. They're going to go and find other countries where it's easier to do business and there are better opportunities.
My final question, I'm sure you like this question. What really kept you up at night when you were in Sri Lanka as ambassador? And what advice would you have for Sri Lanka?
I thought this was only a 12-minute seminar. Well, probably it wasn't anything to do with the government. It was much more, the LTTE and all of the problems that we were trying to deal with there. But I will say that everybody thought that being ambassador in Sri Lanka was this terrible ordeal. I did come under quite a lot of criticism from both sides for trying to kind of be independent and try to do the right thing. But I didn't lose sleep at night over that. I always tried to stay true to our values and what was the right thing to do. And as long as you feel like you're doing the right thing, then you can sleep well at night. So I never worried too much about the criticism that I got from either side, because I knew that we were staying true to American values. And we just had a wonderful time in Sri Lanka, despite occasional bombings and things like that. And we always enjoy going back to your lovely country.
Any advice to strengthen the relationship?
Well, again, just what I talked about before, particularly on the business front. I think Sri Lanka has many opportunities for American companies. I think there's terrific opportunities in the energy sector for promoting clean energy. I think there's opportunities in tourism. On the digital side, you've got some very smart people that could really do some important back office work, and you've had some success in that area. So I think Sri Lanka has plenty of opportunities, and it just needs to do as much as they can, like every other country in the world, to improve their business climate, to make sure that there's, again, a good rule of law, make sure that there's no corruption. And if they can do those things, then they can succeed. And certainly, I'm happy to play my role in that as well, because as a friend of Sri Lanka, I do want to see your country succeed, and I do want to see continued strong trade and investment between our two countries.
Thank you, Bob. It was great talking to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. And again, my warm greetings to all of my friends in Sri Lanka.